Hey, fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box. Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to the 4th box. I cannot believe it, but somehow this is the 90th episode. Seems a little crazy that we have been at this for 90 weeks. I know that we're always excited to meet here at our Buckman Tavern and just talk a little bit about what's been going on through the past week, talk about things to come, share those ideas with all of you. So happy to be back. Pops, how's it going?
Good. You had an exciting weekend at the racetrack. How was that?
Yeah, it was good. A lot of fun. Always a fun time to hang out with a crowd that, generally it's a similar crowd. Everybody sort of, you usually can trust people kind of think the same way.
Yeah.
I'll call attention to it real quick just because it's an interesting thing that happened. Not good interesting, bad interesting, but I do think it's one that's sort of skated by not too far from where we were. In New Hampshire, there was actually a shooting at a country club. The person ran in screaming "Free Palestine," and this was all going on just in the restaurant. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I do think that there are more and more things that we're seeing and hearing like this going on around the country, just in a restaurant at a country club. I mean, completely unrelated to anything. You go to dinner and you rarely are thinking about something like that happening to you. But I think all of us should be cognizant of these levels of threats being sort of always prevalent. I don't think we need to dive down that too much tonight. I mean, we haven't got into the toast even yet or your quote for the night yet. So we're just starting off, but I just kind of wanted to call attention to that just because it was close to where we were at. And you hate to hear about those things, and it really puts into perspective that could be any one of us at any time. So important to be thinking about that all.
Yeah, of course. And I think there was a wedding party or something that was part of that thing. Again, not to spend a whole lot of time on it, very unfortunate. But yeah, so greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the 4th Box Studio, tucked away safely here in our virtual Buckman Tavern. It's great to have all our friends and patriots along with us, joining for our 90th episode, as you mentioned. I think that's great. Real quick, for those who may not have heard, the 4th box is emblematic of a statement that was made famous by Stephen Decatur Miller, and probably even more so by Frederick Douglass, which had to do with the 4 boxes of liberty, or the 4 boxes that we have at our disposal to keep us free. And that's the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box. And thus comes the name of the 4th Box Studio. So tonight, my quote: "The smile of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right, which heaven itself has ordained." And that came from John Jay, one of the great founding voices, the very first Supreme Court Chief Justice, John Jay. And then as I was preparing for tonight's episode, I stumbled across a quote of a contemporary that I wanted to share. I thought it was good. "Imagine being more upset about a canceled TV show than a political assassination and still thinking you're a decent human being." And that was from none other than one of our favorites, Ted Nugent. And I think he was sharing that on his social media, and it had, I think, several million views. Anyway, I thought that was pretty appropriate for the last couple of weeks. As we mentioned last week, we had just gone past Constitution Day, which is September 17th, to commemorate the signing of the Constitution. And the actual Constitution was initially signed on that date, September 17th, 1787. So, we mentioned last week since 2004. The history is much deeper than that. There were some things codified in 2004, which includes, I'd like to mention, when we talk about Constitution Day, way back in 1911, in the Iowa schools system, they first recognized Constitution Day. So it kind of sprung out of a grassroots thing out in Iowa where somebody had the wherewithal within the school system to recognize how important it was for all of us to stay connected to the Constitution. It is the document that forms our government. So it behooves all of us to become familiar with this document, to recognize the importance of it in our lives. It is the control measures that we have over our elected government at the federal level. And incidentally, so there were 13 states recognized as independent nation states that formed a contract which was put in place to spell out certain things that they wanted a central entity to take care of for them, such as a common currency and open borders between states for trade and commerce, a common military for defense of these 13 collective independent states. These are the basis of the Constitution. Now, how we got so far off in the weeds that we are today, where everything from soup to nuts is regulated by our federal government, completely unconstitutionally, I would suggest, is because I think we have moved away from many of us being familiar with the document and demanding that our elected officials live up to it. But to go back to the history a little bit, 1911, the Iowa schools first recognized Constitution Day, that being September 17th, to commemorate the actual signing of the Constitution. By 1917, the Sons of the American Revolution promoted Constitution Day through a committee that included notable figures like Calvin Coolidge and John D. Rockefeller. So it was starting to gather steam on a national level. By 1917, as mentioned, the Sons of the American Revolution were promoting Constitution Day, which, as we mentioned, was just celebrated. By 1939, it was nationally recognized, and newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst advocated for a day to celebrate American citizenship. So during this last 100 years or so, it was being recognized as Constitution Day, and then it kind of morphed into what was called Citizenship Day for some period of time. And by 1940, Congress designated the third Sunday in May as I Am an American Day. So these were all bits and pieces of what has come back to being officially known as Constitution Day. By 1952, the observance was moved to September 17th, appropriately, as previously mentioned, and renamed Citizenship Day by Congress. So now it went back from May back to September 17th, the day of the actual signing of the Constitution, but was still being called Citizenship Day. And then by 2004, an amendment by Senator Robert Byrd, formerly of West Virginia, he's passed away now, but longtime serving senator from West Virginia, established September 17th as Constitution Day. And one of the key things that came along with this designation was that on Constitution Day and Constitution Week, and when that was put in place in 2004, it required educational programs about the Constitution in all federally funded schools and agencies. So, how much of that do you think goes on today in agencies and in schools? If they receive federal funds by this bill that was put in place, an amendment that was put in place back in 2004, all are required to give instruction on the Constitution. So, I think back a few sessions ago, or maybe once or twice during the course of our episodes, we had talked about some of us here in Elk County that participated in the schools providing that education, which we did so with your class and the next several classes at the high school which you graduated from. And at that time, we passed out pocket constitutions. We may have even at one time or another passed out the Citizens Rule Book, which is really the one that we have continued to promote through the Fourth Box and other opportunities that we have had to speak in front of people. We've always been promoting the Citizens Rule Book, which not only includes the full Constitution and 27 amendments, but it also includes the Declaration of Independence, rules of the jury. There's a lot of great information. If you have an opportunity to get yourself a copy of the Citizens Rule Book, that would go a long way to helping you understand the founding of this country, the founding documents that helped establish the government by which we now live under, and all those other things, such as our responsibilities as a juror. But to get back to Constitution Day, that was the progression at which it took place. So as early as 1911 appears to be the earliest history that we can find that said, people within the state of Iowa and the school system started to recognize Constitution Day. So we're encouraging everybody to make that a part of your September, that third week in September 17th especially. Please always remember the Constitution. Take a little time to read it. Get yourself a pocket Constitution. They're available any number of places. You can get them from your local courthouse, your state rep, your federal rep. You can get these Constitutions any place. You can pick up a Citizens Rule Book for $2 or $3. And again, that has a lot of those other things described therein. But I think if we as a nation not only just recognized Constitution Day, but understood it, if more of us understood it, perhaps we could get the federal government squeezed back into those 18 authorities that are delegated as authorities. And remember, the 10th Amendment says the power is not delegated. So the only thing that the federal government has authority on are the authorities that are delegated according to the 10th Amendment, which is part of the original Bill of Rights. So if more of us understood those things, perhaps we'd have some chance in containing this government that only continues to grow larger and be more intrusive, more nanny state in all of our lives. So that's where we would like to, from the Fourth Box, encourage everybody, pay particular attention during the month of September, especially September 17th, Constitution Day.
So, lots of stuff that you went through right there. A couple things that, kind of my knee-jerk response to some of those things. First off, I want to give a shout out to some of our listeners, the folks at Century Hill Homestead, who just recently had shared a picture of their copy of the Citizens Rule Book that they had to get their hands on after hearing about it a few times on the show. So shout out to you guys. We hope a few more listeners follow in their footsteps. Second thing I want to say is I kind of found it interesting as you were explaining the history of this, how much back and forth there was and how much time government spent on renaming it and changing the date and changing what it was all about, and probably how little time actually went into what they were actually doing to act on the day, as far as certainly education. Spent a lot of time, talking about it, but not really doing anything to educate the people, which is such a perfect metaphor for like everything the government is. You know what I mean? Like spending all this time, how much money, how many meetings did we sit in, how much discussion was there of the people that are being paid by our tax dollars to sit and go back and forth on what they should call it and rename it and change the date to, and yet very few people have even heard of its existence, and we're a week out. So
Yeah,
kind
I
of crazy.
I think your reaction last week really does say it all. I mean, we went right by Constitution Day, and did anybody really notice? And I think that's largely how the Constitution is viewed today. It's something from back in our history that come election time, they'll all be running around with their pocket Constitution, but none of them live by it. None of them live by it, as suggested. But to go back to one of your other observations, it's really curious to me, and I didn't dig deep enough in my research. But how did it turn from Constitution Day to Citizenship Day, and then how did it get moved to May? And what significance does May have to a day that was originally set up to pay special attention to the signing of our Constitution? So, as you said, I think it is a perfect microcosm of government. We're going to make a lot of hullabaloo about, I'll get everybody together and we're going to designate this as Constitution Day and we're going to make these mandates. But are any of them followed up on? Has any more emphasis been placed on teaching the Constitution in schools? I would suggest probably quite the opposite. I don't think the Department of Education is particularly fond of the limits of the Constitution, so I don't think that there's any big effort. And you'll recall when we had the opportunity to talk to your class, I think we were there about an hour or two, and that is probably one of the more extensive discussions related to the Constitution that has gone on anywhere that we can, maybe other than Hillsdale College or something like that. I don't think, even down at the elementary school level, this is supposed to be being brought to the kids. Hey, maybe it's at an elementary appropriate level, but this is supposed to be being taught every year so that all of us had ingrained in us from those years of school the value that we all should have in the Constitution. But I think we're far from that.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to go into next. Was it's interesting that this, part of this day coming into being was this requirement, and now it feels more like it's required to not talk about it. I mean, certainly some shift has happened where public schools or any publicly funded, government funded school is not talking about this on purpose. It's not just because it just isn't in our curriculum. The curriculum comes from somewhere, comes from someone, comes from places like the Department of Education, which is part of the government. The government is the one that's telling the rest of us that, oh yeah, it's a requirement to talk about this in schools. Well, no, it isn't. We clearly don't want people learning about it because it's not being talked about on almost any level. So where was that shift? It to me, it feels like it was a recent thing, like it was a recent change, but I know that wasn't true because you brought it up just moments ago. You came in as just a regular citizen. It's not like you were an educator or a high school teacher, some sort of American history teacher or anything like that. You came in as a citizen wanting to share this information with the people in school, in high school, in middle school at the time. And, you've got a lot more of that backstory than I do as far as how they ended up allowing that to happen for a while. But it certainly wasn't just going on in the school. The teachers weren't talking about it. And that was quite a while back. And that wasn't even a public school. So
Right.
even though this feels like a new thing, it's not new. This has been going on for a very long time.
Yeah. I think it's been the slow drift away from our founding principles, and I think there are forces within the country that have encouraged that drift away, and Department of Education is certainly one of them, of many, because I think we probably talked about on an episode or two previously about the eighth grade final examination that was given, and you can find these online, these documents from 1899, and the understanding that the children graduating from eighth grade had about our Declaration of Independence, which I want to point out to my back here. You can't see it. I'll turn the camera a little bit. Right here, I was just given this copy this past week. I want to send a shout out to Pat over here in Ridgeway, Pennsylvania, who donated that to me. That is a vintage copy of the original Declaration of Independence. It was donated to me here just this past week. So anyway, to get back to where I was going, back in 1899, the eighth grade final examination required a much more thorough understanding of the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, and Constitution than I would suggest almost any politician, lawyer, or judge in this country has today. Was a requirement at the eighth grade level. So as mentioned, I think there's been a shift. I think it's by design. I think there's forces that we've talked about in many occasions that are trying to slowly nudge us away from the very foundational principles that our forefathers fought for and encapsulated an effort to try to keep those things in those founding documents, and that being the Constitution, which shaped our government. So I think there are things that have moved us away from that by design. So it's up to us. It's up to us, we the citizenry, to make ourselves familiar with this document, understand it. So when you are talking to one of your elected officials or a lawyer, you have the wherewithal to be able to speak about the way this system is supposed to work. So I think that was the grand intent way back in 1911, was to make sure we're not drifting away from keeping our children aware and educated about how we got this freedom, and the government was supposed to protect it.
Right. Yeah. So I think one thing that's always an important conversation to have when we talk about these documents is there's a lot of rebuttals from everyone on all sides about, this is an old document. This was written in the 1700s. It's pretty hard to even imagine the lifestyle of the people that were sitting down and writing this document. It's meant to remain the supreme law of the land forever. That is the entire point. Yet, a lot of arguments that come with, pick a line in the Constitution. Most people can find a way to argue it based on time alone and how it no longer applies because they weren't speaking of the modern world. Do you want to kind of touch on why that is not the case? Why that argument can be debunked, I guess you could say?
Well, sure. So first of all, the Constitution, as was stated by Patrick Henry, another significant voice, founding voice, the Constitution is not an instrument for government to control the people. The Constitution was written as an instrument for the people to control government. So that's the first thing everybody's got to get in their head, is the Constitution is not giving authority to government to lord it over us. It is giving authority to us, we the people, to control government. So then it went on to say what the branches of government are going to be and what the responsibilities and the authorities of those branches are going to be. So Article 1 in the Constitution, and there was a reason that it was Article 1. Article 1 is the legislative section, article, the legislature. That is the voice of the people. The law-making capability of government comes from the voice of the people. That is step number 2 to get in your head. We, the people, decide what laws we want to live by. And underneath of that, in Article 1, Section 8, which we've talked about many times, are those specific authorities that are related to maintaining a uniform currency, interstate commerce without penalties being placed from one state onto the other, a common military. Those were the things. Then you had the executive branch, which is number 2, and that is to carry out, to execute the law, the executive branch. And the chief executive at the federal level is the president. The states have a governor, the counties have a sheriff. Every level, every branch has every level has an executive branch. Then you have the judicial branch, and the judicial branch at the federal level, and there are federal courts scattered out around the country in addition to the Supreme Court. They are to be rendering judgment on cases that are related to what? The 18 authorities. The 18 authorities. If it is not one of those 18 authorities, in my estimation, in my reading of the Constitution, the Supreme Court has no business. That isn't like the stopgap last chance you get to go to in your divorce case. That's not what this is. They were only there to hear cases related to whether or not something had happened that was contrary to the authorities spelled out in the Constitution. Now, that's a long way of getting around to where your question was. You're right. There are instances today where maybe something going on today is in question as to when it was originally written, but largely keep in mind, it was written to only contain government. Just give them their authority. So not a whole lot has changed. They still have those authority over the currency and over the military and over the border, the highways and the post office, those sort of things. But if something comes up today that is a challenge to one of those things that they have specific authorities on, and there certainly can be a large piece of the population, if anybody's paying attention, say, I don't think the original document could have considered this particular thing the way we deal with it today. Okay, in this book, and I think it's Article 4 or 5, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, it is spelled out what has to happen to change the document. You got to get a majority of the states to have their legislatures agree with it. And if you get a majority, 2/3 or 3/4, it's all in there. I'm not remembering it verbatim right off the top of my head. But the mechanism to change the document is within the document. Why do they all bitch and squeal about it? Because it's hard. It was meant to be hard. You got to get 2/3 or 3/4 of the state's legislatures to go along with it. When do you ever get 2/3 or 3/4 of a vote to go along with anything unless they're giving themselves a raise? This is where we're at. So it was by design meant to be very difficult to change. But guess what? It can be changed. So to say that this document's just a piece of garbage at 200 years old, we should be living by something new? No. If you don't like what's in it, and every single person from your local cop standing down on the street down to the President of the United States that sits in a public office, put their hand on that Bible, swore they were going to uphold, defend, and preserve this thing. as it is constructed. So if you want to change it, work to change it, use the mechanisms that are in place in here, but you can't just say, well, we're going to throw that section out because it no longer applies. Perfect example is, and I know I've talked about it before. This is my classic example. So here in Pennsylvania, we had a constitution that was largely the template for what ended up becoming the U.S. Constitution, because Pennsylvania was one of the original states, 13 colonies becoming states that got together and helped form this thing called a Constitution, which is a contract between the states. But our Constitution had a significant, imprint on what ended up being the U.S. Constitution. So in Pennsylvania, the right to keep and bear arms is Article 21. Article 21 of the Pennsylvania State Constitution. It says the right of the people keep and bear arms, defense of themselves and the state shall not be questioned. Shall not be questioned. Then 3 articles later in Article 25, it says everything in this foregoing article shall forever be held inviolate, meaning it cannot be ever changed. However, here in Pennsylvania, as I expect in most states, you go to buy a gun. What's somebody hand you? They hand you a form that's got 40 questions on it. Who's breaking the law? The supreme law of the state of Pennsylvania, Article 21, says shall not be questioned. You go down to get a handgun permit as if we need one, because again, you're not to be questioned. But we have them. Who's breaking the law? In my estimation, if the sheriff hands you a form to fill out that's got a bunch of questions on it, he's breaking the law. But he's the one that raised his hand and swore he was going to defend that Constitution, that being of Pennsylvania, and the U.S. Constitution. Who's the liar? Who's breaking the law? And then they wonder why we don't trust any of them. If you can outright violate the very promise that you made to all of us when we gave you our seat to sit in, that's commissioners, that's sheriffs, that's state legislatures, judges, governors, all of them. If they signed that into law, that you got to fill out this form and you got to fill out, who broke the law? They did. They broke the law. So now, if anybody wants to understand why some of us have a whole lot of assache about our elected officials, this was what the blood of our forefathers purchased for us to remain free. And the people we put in office guaranteed us by their promise, by their solemn oath, that they were going to live by it. And none of them do. That is the value of Constitution Day. That is why we all must be familiar with it. Just like I quoted last week, and I won't have it verbatim either, but Albert Einstein said, every single one of us have to accept our responsibility in keeping this document enforced, or you're not going to have it. And that's why we don't. So we here at the Fourth Box are making every effort to encourage everybody. Please get yourself a pocket Constitution. Contact the Fourth Box if you have questions. If you don't know where to get one, we will be happy to help you get one. And we will be happy to help you understand. There's all kinds of places you can go. But get one of these things right here. This is an awesome book. Gives you all the details on jury nullification, on Declaration of Independence, the importance thereof, and the full Constitution and Bill of Rights.
Yeah. So awesome. A lot of good stuff there. There's so much information. To be honest, you're probably learning more about the Constitution than you've ever learned in certainly school, but maybe just your life, because it's not stuff that we're really, I don't want to say meant to talk about, but kind of. I mean, nobody's encouraging it. So this is really the basis of our freedom, and not knowing it is probably why you're not as angry as we are most of the time. So I guess ignorance is bliss, but the problem is going to keep getting worse until more of us can become aware of these very, very simple ideas. Again, they're old ideas, so they're not overly complex despite what you might think about it. despite thinking it's a hard document to read. Now, I want to go back and ask just a couple more questions because as you were talking, I thought, oh, maybe these will be good things to sort of hit on. So let's talk about the significance of some of these state constitutions a little bit too. Obviously, you're not familiar with probably other states' constitutions, but that's not really the point. Let's just kind of share the importance of them and why there's still value to them and how they versus, the US Constitution might take precedence in different situations.
So I think many of the state constitutions are quite similar, and they're constructed very much the same. You have a legislative section that relates to your House and your Senate at the state level, and you have an executive which relates to your governor and the sheriffs in the counties, the governor over the state, the sheriff, and then of course you have the judicial branch, which is the judges. And most of the states have a superior court and a supreme court. So you have your county level court, and you have a superior court, and you have a supreme court. Most of the states are kind of set up in that general format. And then there may be some other sections, like in Pennsylvania, there's a whole section related to laws just that are relative to Philadelphia and maybe Pittsburgh, the bigger cities. There are separate elected offices that are held in cities that aren't held out in the country, and so on. But to go back to your bigger and more important part of the question, I think, so the federal government has the authority over those 18 specific things that are governed by the legislative branch, where they get to make laws on it. The executive branch does have authority, mostly related to international treaties and international trade deals and stuff like that that can be handled by the executive branch. But the domestic lawmaking is taken care of by the legislative branch. And there's 18 things that are spelled out in the federal. So that means that your state constitution can get into everything else that's not spelled out and delegated to the federal level, that being a common currency, military, highways, post office, etc. So all the other things that the state wants to incorporate in the Constitution, meaning these are going to be very, very difficult rules to change. We put them in our Constitution. They're not meant to be light and flippant and changing every time you get a new person in office. They're supposed to be bedrock policies that the state is going to live by. So within that sphere, once you exit the sphere of the 18 specific delegated authorities, now the sphere is the state level. This is what is proven out in the Mack Prince versus U.S. case. Our good friend, who's been on several times, Sheriff Richard Mack, took that case all the way to the Supreme Court back in 1994, standing up against the federal government, saying you do not have jurisdiction. And that case was one establishing that each of these authorities, federal and state, have superiority in their respective sphere. So the feds have it in those 18 things, and next, the states have it. That is the importance of the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the federal level are left for the people and or the states. So everything else that is not spelled out in one of those 18 things is delegated to the states. So then all the states have a constitution, and how they write those things up that are important to them, there's slight differences, but many of them are quite similar. And that is the way it's supposed to be. So you have the state, then you have down at county and municipal level, and you've always heard us say on this show, the people that are supposed to have the most influence on your life as elected officials should be your local officials. They are the ones that are closest to you. They make up policies related to the municipality that you live in, city ordinances, and so on. Then you have the state level. The people who should have the least about to do with what goes on in your daily life are the feds, because they only have the military, border, currency, post office, roads. So how often do we need to make laws related to those things? Congress should be working part-time. The Supreme Court should be working part-time. We're 200 years into taking care of 18 things. How do we have 1,000-page bills coming out related to all kind of stuff that is not a delegated authority because we, the people, are sleeping. Those things should be left down here to the local level, where if you don't like something that has come out at the local level, you can march right downtown and go pound on somebody's desk and saying, this is not right. Instead, we've allowed all that authority to migrate down to Washington, and we keep plodding along, tolerating unlawful government. Because if it broke the supreme law of the land, it's unlawful. And that's where we are today. So everything's kind of upside down. We're going to keep promoting and teaching and trying to get people to recognize how it was supposed to be. And it was supposed to be the people with the most influence on our life are supposed to be the people closest to us. And the further they get away, the less influence they have on their life. Very much unlike what it is today.
Absolutely. There's so many different points I could go down. We could talk about a lot of different things. One of them, that I don't even want to dive into just because it opens a whole conversation. We could be here for another several hours, but it's the one that's most easy for me to always point to for people is with everything that you were just referring to and all of these laws that are constantly coming out that are hindering our experience in this world. How does it affect your wallet? Like, how are these things impacting your life in your home? I think people think, oh, it doesn't affect me, but it does. And that's the surest way to know, because many, many Americans are living on credit cards, surviving off credit cards. As a country, we're well over $1 trillion in credit card debt. And that's just spiking up and up. But you know what you do have to pay? Well, you can't afford to buy the basics for your home. Well, you can't afford to keep the lights on in your house. You do have to pay the taxes to your government. And then there's people that have this idea in their head that, yeah, we have to keep doing that. We have to keep funding the government because they're the only thing keeping the wheels on. The country couldn't possibly move forward. Well, if they weren't in office, sitting there, spending all this time creating all these laws to keep us in chains, we wouldn't have to spend money on them. It's like so simple. It's actually the most simple formula.
Right. And there's been several prominent people that have come up with ways, to rein that in. But largely, it is up to we the people. You get what you tolerate. And there's been so many different people that have reconfigured that statement. But that is precisely true. You get what you tolerate. And if you tolerate having 30 or 35% or maybe 25% of your hard-earned labor every week, you march off to the workplace, wherever it may be, the school, the factory, the police job, whatever it might be, you will march off there and you do your best and bring home that paycheck. And at the end of the week, some son of a bitch stuffs his hand down your pocket, takes out 25, 30, 35% of it, says, you ain't smart enough to know what to do with this. I'm going to take care of it for you. And we tolerate it. And most all of that money is going to places that are not authorized in this book. You think about the money. When the Doge got going under Trump and they were going to try to defund some of these programs, and there's all these big outcries from the Holly weirdos and the music stars. Oh, half the world's going to starve. You can't take that. Where does it say in that Constitution that we are obligated to spend millions and billions of dollars promoting transgenderism and all this other crap all over the world? That is money that was stolen out of your pocket. And the only reason it's continuing to go on is we are continuing to tolerate it. We're tolerating. It's easier. People by nature are tolerant. I would much rather just go along than to stir up a fight. But at some point, we got to say enough is enough. Look at the way you people, I'm talking about your generation. Look at the challenges your generation are facing today. You can't buy a home. You can't barely make your payment on your school loan and have a car good enough to get you back and forth to work so that some son of a bitch can take half your paycheck. all of those benefits that were made available by the greatest generation. Every car, every house got a car in the garage, every house got a TV in it. Now every family's got a car for each kid, and we got big screen TV after big screen TV, and we do this and we do that. It's all coming to an end, folks. Your generation cannot live like that. Your generation will not live the life that we live. Why? Because greedy bastards at the top stealing from the many to give to the few. This is the basis of this whole thing, and we keep plodding along, tolerating the theft that is going on, because nowhere in that book is that authorized. And that's why we got to know the book.
Yeah, for sure. So just a great thing to come back to. Obviously, we try to bring the founding documents in often. It's really important to us. We are constitutionalists. That's like the whole basis of what we're doing here, in case you haven't caught on yet. So awesome to talk about all that. And I know we could dive so much deeper into some of these subjects. Thank you for always being prepared with a lot of knowledge on that. But before we continue down that road, unless there's more you'd like to add on the Constitution, I know there's a couple other subjects we want to get into tonight. Obviously, there's still so much going on. There is still so much unknown with the whole Charlie Kirk thing. And it's certainly worth continuing to discuss, because there's a lot of questions as to who is behind this. And you mentioned, the Supreme Court earlier, and the role of these federal courts. And it, makes me think about the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And this is another government agency where we are shelling out all kinds of money to, and for what? For some of the most absurd claims imaginable in this investigation, for them to wrap it up in 33 hours and call it. I mean, I know there's a couple subjects you want to get into, and I'm kind of probably jumping right ahead. So if there's anything else you want to sneak in there before we segue, certainly do.
I would. So first of all, I think we found a pretty good place to wind down a Constitution discussion, and we did have a great deal of emphasis placed on Constitution Day. So remember September 17th. Put it on your calendar as a day to remember, just like your kids' birthdays and other significant days throughout your year. Put down September 17th. Focus on Constitution and familiarizing yourself with it. And we do have some comments we can make related to the Charlie Kirk thing. Is still on everybody's radar, as it should be. There's still a lot of discussion, but I want to call attention to the passing of Boone Cutler, who we had the very distinct privilege of listening to and meeting out in Las Vegas. And for those of you who don't know Boone, he was an activist. He was a veteran. He was very, very involved with suicide prevention amongst the veteran community. Radio talk show guy, author, significant warrior, an actual warrior, the very first warrior from the Iraq-Afghanistan era to have a radio show. We lost, a week after we lost Charlie. So two significant voices for freedom that we have lost. And there's still an awful lot of speculation as to what went on with Boone, and I'm not even going to get into that, but all I can do here from our little platform at the Fourth Box is offer our sincere condolences to Mike Flynn, who was very good friends with Boone, and Boone's family and loved ones, and the veteran community that is sorely missing Boone. We hate to see him go. 45 years old, way too young. Don't know all the circumstances, so we're just going to leave it at that. But our hearts and prayers go out to Boone, the Cutler's family, and those that he's left behind.
Yeah, for sure. Really, really incredible guy and speaker. I would add to that, for anyone who was not familiar with him, certainly look up some of his work, some of the conversations he's had. I'm sure you can find him on YouTube and Rumble. he really shared a lot of ideas that would probably resonate with much of our crowd. So yeah, certainly look in some of the stuff that he did in his life, because really, really great guy to listen to, and had a lot of really smart ideas, and certainly, was on the right side of freedom-minded people, and, moving this country forward in the right way.
Yeah, be sorely missed. So our hats go off to the family, and our hearts and prayers go out. Okay. We're gonna go back to the Charlie Kirk thing, which there's still a lot of headlines, even more questions I think come out, and the more silent the FBI is on addressing some of the questions that are coming from significant voices with national platforms that are coming out, questioning how he died. Was it actually the way it was presented? And there's a lot of speculation that things were not at all as was presented.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to, I don't want to make it the sole focus of every episode, but we touched on it last week. The truth behind what went on here, the truth behind what's going on with the Epstein files, these are things we cannot let go. There are small sins committed by our government every day. Death by 1,000 cuts. I think we mentioned that in episode 3, 4, very early on. 90 weeks ago, we were talking about that. That's what we're experiencing as a country. But some of these cuts are not quite so small. Some of these wounds that we're suffering as a nation are way more difficult to just glance over, to just let it skate by without getting upset about it, because you were never even made aware of it. And it's very hard to even recognize that it's going on, because the government is doing so much wrongdoing every single day that none of us can keep up with it, truly. However, some of these things are very, very big, very bold, and very in our faces. And while people are mad, we need to keep up the momentum, because the fight for truth can never be let go. I mean, the whole Charlie Kirk thing is so absurd, and I know it spins us away a little bit from the Constitution conversation that we had earlier there, but he was absolutely a warrior for the Constitution and for truth more than anything. And we have to stay dedicated to that cause, to the fight that he was fighting. We can't let it go. We absolutely cannot let up on asking some of these questions. I know we were talking a little bit about it before we started recording. This whole new spiel about why there's no exit wound, why there was not a bullet found. All of these questions that people have a ton of theories about. The latest narrative is that he just was the man of steel and had incredibly dense bones and stopped a 30-06 round, which a lot of people who listen to our show probably know what a 30-06 round is, probably understand the type of gun that he used. This is not how it works. It's not how it works. That makes no sense. For ammunition from this type of rifle to just get stuck in a human bone, a neck bone no less. We're not talking about like your femur. The bones in your neck are pretty small, pretty brittle, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know about human anatomy. I mean, there's not a major bone in your neck, certainly not on the side of your neck, that's stopping a round of this magnitude. So this in and of itself is already unbelievable that the FBI hasn't come out and immediately said, yeah, you know what? We're looking into other theories. Potentially there was another weapon. Potentially, let's be real, the shot came from a different angle, different direction. There's people even questioning if the person was underneath Charlie, which I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to just because of the angle that I saw. However, they did pave the grass he was sitting on right away, which is really, really weird. Like, that's a weird thing to do, to just pave over the grass that somebody was. So there's a ton of questions. I mean, the timeline doesn't add up. Obviously, we have images of this kid at Dairy Queen, 17 minutes away, like 30 minutes after he allegedly kills a guy. There's even the timeline with how his parents got in touch with him doesn't make sense. Then you have these text messages, which make absolutely no sense. Again, we touched on it last week. They apparently are from Discord, and Discord says no, they're not from Discord. The correspondents themselves, it's not only is it just weird verbiage, but even some of the phrases used don't necessarily align with the rest of the story. I mean, almost none of these pieces of the puzzle fit together, and our lovely federal government says, sure they do. Don't worry about it. And we're just supposed to not worry about it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap here, really, to tie it back to our earlier discussion related to the Constitution and how did we get to the point where our country is asleep and not paying attention to the very protections that are in place for them. The same way this kind of crap goes on is because there's simply not enough of us demanding better answers. And remember, we've talked about in the past, as far as I'm concerned, government, the different divisions of government are there primarily to protect the other elements of government. They're not there to protect you. So is the FBI helping cover up? I'd be more inclined to believe that the amount of evidence that's being presented by people asking questions, people with very significant platforms, held very significant positions, and I might add, there Paul Craig Roberts, who's was an undersecretary of the Treasury. He was an associate editor for the Wall Street Journal for years. He had a piece on Lou Rockwell today that asked the very same questions that we were talking about last week. Was it the Israelis? Was it our own government for some reason? Watch for false flag. I think there is so many voices out here, but the majority plods along. Hey, the FBI said this is what it is. So the political pressure dies down because the majority, precisely why we were never intended to be a democracy, by the way, we're supposed to live by the rule of law, not mob rule. That's what a democracy is mob rule. So if the mob has been placated by the story they received, they're moved on to the football game. As much as it pains me to say it, the majority of people say, well, the FBI buttoned it up. He got shot by this kid. The kid's a patsy. And that's all the more there's going to be to it. So we have to keep up, and we have to keep doing what we promised to do last week, and that is reminding people this is a good versus evil struggle. When there are people in this country, significant amounts of people, that can stand up and cheer for what no human cheers for, it is not in your internal conscience to be cheering and witnessing the death of another person. This is beyond human makeup. And to think that this stuff is going on around us by fairly large numbers of people, people with platforms that are hinting that this was okay and there's others that this needs to happen to. This is not normal behavior for human beings. And we here at the Fourth Box continue to remind you about the struggle that we're in. And it is a struggle, good versus evil. It has nothing to do with whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat. Maybe there's a lot more of them that have found themselves on that side of the ledger because that's who they generally align with. But as we mentioned last week, at some point, you got to recognize that this is going against your internal conscience. I don't care how many other things this party or that party stands for that I agree with. You gotta have the wherewithal within you to say, I'm not going along with this, and we need to be demanding answers.
Yes, absolutely yes. one thing that you mentioned a while ago was that we should start expecting and preparing for major global events. And it's hard to know, which event will be the first one and what could potentially be a tidal wave. Potentially, we're witnessing the start of that now. And I'm not saying this to further this idea of a racial divide or, this division that people have tried to sow between different ideologies. But yes, the Israeli government has been questioned here a lot. It was a big point that I made last week. In this article that you just shared moments ago, it came up. There's a lot of talk about this. And there's a part of me that wonders where we're currently at as a country with our threat of this seemingly Muslim takeover that's going on, because we can't forget that that's kind of still right at the edge of our doorstep. We talked about Minneapolis and this call to prayer that they've got going on 5 times a day. We're watching what's happening in New York City. We see this incredible uptick in mosques in areas like Texas, which maybe would surprise a lot of people. But it's all over the country. It's all over our cities. And, this was one of the main things that was discussed as a potential risk factor of having such an open border, was these ideas of sleeper cells coming into the country, and many from which are from countries that do not like us very much and do not like our ideas and our politics, and would prefer something much harsher than what any of us here are used to. And, we start to see these ideas of false flags popping up, and it does make you wonder. And again, I'm just spitballing, okay? I'm nobody, and this is based on no evidence whatsoever. But it does make you wonder when you see a force as currently kind of unstoppable as the Israeli government, who is really falling in favor, particularly with the young crowd, say the crowd that Charlie Kirk appeals to. They're really falling out of favor with a lot of people, but certainly the young people, but definitely America as a whole. And who does the Israeli government always promise to come after and is currently coming after? None other but the Muslims. We've been watching it happen in Palestine for how long? And then we think about the potential threats that are facing this country, and my mind just goes to this idea of a false flag that could come from a nation like Israel, who has a big hold on our country, blaming it on another country who does pose a threat, and then for that reason engaging us in a war that we feel obligated to be joined in on, whether it is completely manipulated from its start or not. And going back to what we know and the incredible increase in this type of people from around the world, it does make you wonder, could that happen here on our own soil? Could that be a civil war? Could that be what takes down our country? And does that sound incredibly dramatic to many people listening to this? Absolutely, I hear that argument. I get it. But these are the things that I'm asking myself all the time. It's not my first theory, but is it something? Is it a question in my mind? Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so I've stated many times, I think you're largely in agreement. What I really think is going on is there's this small group of globalist leaders that are trying desperately to get the United States out of the way of their quest for a one world government, with them being the supreme authority. And the quest to get the United States out of the way, I think, has many, many fronts that have all been orchestrated or perpetuated, coaxed along by this group through the use of the deep state, which we're going to call big pharma, big food, big military industrial complex. So there is just a tremendous gamut of things, in my estimation, that are at the disposal of this group that wants to get the United States out of the way. None of the least of which are leaving the border open to allow these potential sleeper cells, to allow these communities to spring up within our United States that are completely opposed to assimilating into our lifestyle. They are here for the sole purpose of overthrowing this, and they were left in on purpose. How about the fentanyl and other thugs and drugs that stream across this country? How about the education system that we talked about that has willfully and intentionally dumbed us down to the point where we hardly can take care of ourselves, let alone understand and demand adherence to the Constitution? What about deploying us all over the world? What about keeping a war going with Ukraine, trying to get one going over in Taiwan, and certainly the mess in the Middle East, that somehow we feel obligated to be the watchdog for all of them? Doesn't it seem like there are so many things? How about the vaccines? I mean, at what point do people say, you know what, I've just heard enough about the vaccine poison and the vaccine risks that come along. I think I'm going to start looking at it. Instead, we willfully plod along, accepting the crap that is tearing us apart. And I thought about it today when I was preparing for the session. And Mark Twain's statement kept going over and over and over in my head. It is easier to fool the people than to convince them that they were fooled. So we were fooled with COVID. I think we're fooled with Charlie Kirk. We're fooled with our need to defend the border. And now people are starting to recognize some of these things, but they do not want to accept. It is harder to convince them that they were fooled. And I think there is a lot of truth to that statement. Number one, I think we're grossly out of touch with the world around us, we as a society at large. I think most people are happy to go fussing over whatever their daily lives consist of and fretting over this and that, and they don't see the big cloud of doom that's gathering overhead. And it seems to me to be perpetuated by those that are in authority and have an opportunity to stop it. And we don't have enough people in this country to recognize that they're doing stuff that they have no authority to. We could impeach them, recall them, get them the hell out of there, and put somebody in that's going to stand up for this country. But I think we're so far asleep. And you might recall several times during past episodes, we talked about Professor Tytler from Scotland, who was over there and wrote the cycle that empires go through. Prior to the Declaration of Independence, he had made the observation that people will always end up in bondage, and we're living in bondage now. If somebody's stealing out of your pocket and providing that for the benefit of somebody else, then you're the slave. You just may not recognize it, but if you're having a third or a quarter of your paycheck stolen to provide for somebody else who is not working, who is the slave? So people will always end up in bondage. And then out of bondage, you gain great spiritual courage. From great spiritual courage, you win back your independence. From independence, you become very prosperous. And from prosperity, you become complacent. I think we're well past complacency. After complacency, you become apathetic. Oh, well, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Let's see what's going on in Hollywood tonight. We're completely apathetic. From apathy, we're in the dependency stage, and a large amount of this country is already dependent. Way, way, way too many dependent people. And from dependency, you're right back into bondage. So we're on that curve. We've talked about it many times. I think there are a lot of individual pieces that are working to see this country destroyed. Our currency, our border, our education system, our medical system, our military, all of them are under attack, and are under attack by people that we trusted to take care of them.
Yeah. Yep. Certainly right. You know, one thing that just kept going into my head as you were talking there is that And I always tell you, I don't think it's so much of a fight to wake people up now. I do think that's happening. Obviously, your generation is probably a little bit different, which is unfortunate because you made the observation earlier that most of my generation doesn't have the funds to fight this. We're the dependent ones now. We're so indebted to the system that we cannot focus on fighting the system that we're awake to. So the fight is waking up the people that can actually help push this ball forward. It might be your parents, it might be your aunts and uncles, it might be your grandparents. The older generation is the group that has the means, but they don't have the knowledge. And what we have to remember is that when we look at all of these threats raining down on us, we're already at war. So do you want to fight in it, or do you want to sit back and watch your country die?
Mm-hmm. Excellent point.
Yeah. Well, that's it for me. A lot of, big stuff, a lot of different topics tonight. But I think it was good overall. We touched on a lot of things that are important to us, and that's what we'll continue to do. So anything else from you, and then you can close us out.
Yeah, no, it was wide ranging, but I think there was a lot of meat and potatoes to tonight's discussion. We had a good bit on the Constitution, and then we circled back to current events. Again, I salute Boone Cutler. I salute Charlie Kirk, their families. My heart's bleeding for you guys, and offering up our prayers for your comfort. Last week during the show, we talked about the various pieces of the armor of God. Tonight, I'm going to read that whole section as my Bible verse, just to refresh all of us, because this is, again, it is the battle of good versus evil. So from Ephesians 6:10, it says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord. In his mighty power, put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything to stand firm. Then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God."
There it is. That might be my favorite one. That might be my favorite verse in the whole book. And I think all of us are really starting to see how it rings true and how we can start applying it to our own lives. So thank you for sharing that one with us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was a great reminder last week when you mentioned it, and we did our best to call upon some of those things mentioned in Ephesians 6:10 through 17. But there it is, and it tells us we will be challenged, and we are. And there is evil amongst us. If they could be cheering for the death of another human being, that is evil.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay. Till next week.
Stay vigilant.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.